BMW no more ICE, Mercedes-Benz mobile servicing, GM with autonomous problems, Toyota are reusing 1997 batteries, Top Gear no more, national EV training, Toyota going back to old ways, most failed car in the German test. My name is Paul Callan and welcome to this week's MotorZen News. A couple of weeks ago we did speak about this story about BMW no longer building combustion engines in Germany, and I was challenged by a few people on this, so I didn't have a lot of detail on it, so I put a bit of effort in to get more detail on it. And yes, it is the case that BMW will no longer produce combustion engines in Germany. They had 1,200 employees in engine construction, and all of those employees in Germany now have been moved over to EV production. And that's not to say that they're not building internal combustion engines. They are. They're just not building them anymore in Germany. And that to me is the significance of this story, is that the home of BMW is Germany, in Bavaria, and they're not building engines anymore. It has to be symbolic of how the world is changing. And people challenged me on this, and I said, no, I didn't say that they're not building any more internal combustion engines. I just said they're not building them in Germany, and that's a significant situation. Mercedes-Benz has launched a pilot program in Germany of mobile servicing. And again, you think, right, what's all this about? You've got these huge, big, fancy Mercedes dealerships, and now you're going to service the car along the road. This is a trend we're starting to see a little bit, but it's for EV only, or primarily for EV. And maybe this again is the future of the industry, that the industry will move to servicing the car on site rather than getting the customer to bring the car to a physical building. Maybe this is the start of something new, because EV is easier to service, it's cleaner, it's not as messy as a conventional internal combustion service. So maybe they're looking at the idea that this enhances their service to the customer by going to the customer. Right now they're starting out with a €70 call out, and that's plus repairs after that. So again, another interesting thing. They're only piloting this program in Germany at the moment, so we'll keep an eye on this to see if this expands out through the rest of Germany. General Motors have been we report on this quite a lot, doing a lot of testing with autonomous vehicles in America. The Cruise is their vehicle they've been testing. Well, they've stopped all testing of the Cruise. Everything has been ceased in America, even testing of the Cruise model where it's got a driver in it. They've stopped all testing of the autonomous vehicles. This is a consequence of an accident that occurred. Another vehicle, a normal motor vehicle, hit a pedestrian. That pedestrian fell into the path of a Cruise, and the Cruise didn't stop, and it dragged the pedestrian for some distance. As a result of this, they're stopping it and they're having a major investigation, and it possibly looks like one of those scenarios that cameras and systems hadn't got that scenario built into it. It just seems like one of those more unusual type events that occurred. So they're clearly very concerned about it and have ceased all testing of the Cruise Autonomous. On the upside for GM, they're just after acquiring a gigacasting company in America. The company's called Tooling and Equipment International. Interesting thing about this company is this is the company that did a lot with Tesla and worked a lot with Tesla at the start when they developed the giga casting procedures that has clearly, we've learned at this stage, given Tesla massive advantages in the margins that they have in their cars. So GM has bought this company. This company had pioneered a concept whereby they could use 3D printing to create a sand mold in order to create the mold for the casting for the vehicle, and that's what's allowed to bring the cost of car manufacturing down. You'd wonder why Tesla didn't buy the company. Maybe they've got other resources in this area and other places. 80 million it looks like is what they give for that company. That's what's been reported at the moment anyway. Toyota Prius, believe it or not, Toyota Prius started in 1997. Hard to believe that Toyota were in a way that far ahead in terms of hybrid. Obviously, Toyota didn't fully commit to the EV thing. They were always of the opinion that hybrid was the way to go. 1997 Priuses, they're coming to end of life now, and there's always been a bit of an issue with the recycling of the batteries. And again, to people that criticise EV, you kind of look at this and saying, here you go. Here's a car that was produced, 25, 26 years ago, and now that battery is going to be recycled. Certainly in the States, the Toyota has set up an agreement with a company called Redwood Materials to recycle, remanufacture, repurpose 5 million Prius batteries. Now, part of the recycling will mean that part of the material in the batteries will go to a new plant that Toyota are building in America to manufacture batteries. It's costing them $14 billion to build this plant, and it's due to be up and running in 2025. So some of the material that will go into that new battery, that will go into that new Toyota, will have come from a Prius that was possibly built in 1997. Again, if you look at the wording on this repurposing, some of these batteries are going to be used in energy storage as well. But the point is that almost all the components to do with a battery that was produced 25, 26 years ago in our current world now will be reused. BBC has just come out this week and made a statement as to what's happening with Top Gear. And it's interesting because in the last couple of weeks, a few people who assumed that I might know something about this asked me what was happening with Top Gear. And I thought I was out of the loop or just didn't hear that story. But no, it was up in the air as to what was happening with Top Gear. BBC have come out and said it's not returning anytime soon. We know that Freddie Flintoff had that accident last year. He flipped the Morgan Super 3. The settlement was £9 million to Freddie for the accident, and at this stage they're saying no, we're not relaunching it, certainly not in that format, and certainly if they do, they're going to have more control on it. This got me to thinking about Top Gear. Top Gear was launched in 1997, and I suppose from my generation, for people who was interested in cars, I can tell you that at 8:30 on a Thursday night, right the way through the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I could tell you I would be in front of the TV watching BBC Two. We're from multi-channel and up round Dundalk, so we got BBC Two, and I can tell you that's where I was at 8:30 on a Thursday night, because I just would move heaven and earth to get there to watch it. 2002 Clarkson came along with the new format. 2003 Hammond and May joined them, and probably I reminisce a little bit about the old Top Gear and think, wow, maybe they could bring it back. And then I wonder, I don't think it would actually exist anymore, because I think we've got a lot of that stuff on YouTube, and I think maybe if they put a specific slot for the old type Top Gear, possibly wouldn't get an audience anymore, and I can just sit and reminisce about the old one. Last week, anybody in the industry in Ireland is really aware of this massive national EV technician training facility that will be launched in Mullingar. If this was other industries or other trades, you think, oh, that's brilliant, and it sounds very impressive. Because we're from the industry, a couple of people and myself have looked at this and said, what's going on? There's so little detail on this, it's not worth talking about it. Clearly, it was just a PR launch, because there's no information as to who it is, what it is, where it is, when it is. Ultimately, we're operating with an incredibly outdated curriculum that currently exists for the traditional apprentice, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 6 in colleges. It's embarrassingly outdated. It's just incredible how useless it is for the modern technician. So when I heard this story, I thought, brilliant. Then you look into it, you go, what is it? Who is it for? Is it for apprentices? Does the apprentice have to complete conventional trade and then go and be an EV technician? Does he simply go straight to be an EV technician? And do we now have an EV technician and a conventional technician? There's no detail on this. There's no information. It sounds lovely on the surface, but they might as well not have launched it, because we don't have any background to it at all. Akio Toyoda was the CEO of Toyota. He became CEO 14 years ago, and this week he's come out at the Japanese mobility show, and said a few interesting things at a press conference. He spoke about how hard it was 14 years ago to change the thinking within Toyota. And you know what, having served my apprenticeship on Toyota and having served my apprenticeship around the Corolla Twin Cam, the 4AGE, and then subsequently look at the products that come out of Toyota after that, there was nothing fun, there was nothing new, there was nothing cutting edge. They were all dull, they were all boring. He speaks about how hard it was to get the company to evolve and develop more exciting cars. But he also says, because he's now moved over to chairman, that he's concerned that it might go back to the old ways. So interesting statements for someone right at the top. And in that story as well, he speaks about the fact that he tested almost every new model that was launched in those years. So I find it very fascinating that a massive company like Toyota could still, the destiny of it was still determined by one man who had a vision, and that vision was to make more fun cars like the Yaris GR that he was responsible for. Supra too, maybe not as glorious as the Yaris for traditionalists, because it's such a BMW oriented car. But now they're talking about relaunching the Celica, and they're talking about relaunching the MR2. But this seems to be along this concept of EV sports car, modular platform. They can do a lot more things with these electric platforms, and I think we're starting to see innovative and creative styling from these manufacturers now, because they realise that it's much more easier to produce exciting cars now, even though the underpinnings will simply be the same battery and the same motor as the most dullest car that's out there. Interesting information coming back from Germany. The car with the most fails in the German test, out of 111 models, the car that has failed the most is a car that has just started to reach the testing in Germany after 3 years. They test the first test after 3 years, and it's the Model 3 Tesla. Out of the 111 models, it has the one that has failed the most. It has got 14.7% of all Model 3s that were tested so far in Germany have failed. Now, again, it seems to be huge commonality in that it's predominantly suspension components and brakes. Now, I think because suspension components is probably down to the fact they're a bit heavier and they're a bit harder on bushings and ball joints, and on the brakes probably down to the fact that it's rust and corrosion from not being used. So it's pretty predictable, and I don't think it's as sensational as maybe the German press is trying to make it. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Usual, if you could like, comment and subscribe. If you could share it with somebody else in the industry. We're going really well with LinkedIn. We're trying to connect, to communicate and talk to the industry, to the trade. So anybody you know out there that might like to look or listen at what we're doing, please share it on to them. Thanks for that. See you next week.